Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Voxology podcast. My name is Mike, and this is my friend.
And again.
Tim. This is my friend Tim. And together, I'm the Vox, he's the ology, and together we're the podcast. And so that's how that works. We're so excited to be able to spend a little bit of time with you today, whatever it is.
Do you remember
the
Wonder Twins from like the...
Absolutely. The
Super
Justice
Friends
League cartoon? Yes. Yeah. Another reference, those under 45.
That is an oldie, but goodie.
Yeah. What we need is just what's the generation behind millennials at Z? We need a Gen Z person to just come on with a buzzer.
What's next? Gen A? Do we start back over?
Do we start over? I don't know. That's a great question.
Because we started at X. That was a faux pas to begin with.
Well, dude, but X was cool.
X was cool.
And it still is. I mean, let's just be honest. But maybe we need a Zer with a button that simply says, okay,
enough.
A dated cultural reference button.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know. I think we're pretty aware.
Well, are we?
I only brought that up because I feel like I should make us a sticker or a shirt that's you're in my head on the Wonder Twins bodies doing a...
Well, one of them was a bird, right? He could form into an animal. I think they
could all change. Yeah, something. Yeah,
no, they couldn't do the same thing. One was a form of water, and one was an animal, maybe. So it would be like a bird carrying a bucket of ice cubes.
That's right. That's
what they would form into, which
the perfect powers.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a small fire over there. Don't worry. I will turn into a bucket of ice water, and my brother will be a bird.
Here's an otter with a bowl full of water. Yes. Well done, Wonder Twins. But speaking of Wonder Twins, Timothy, how are you this week? Anything big going on? Anything capture your imagination?
Oh, boy. I sent you guys a meme. I think memes are the real truth tellers of our time. What did I send you guys yesterday? I liked it.
Oh, yes.
Because it had to do with something that we had been talking about in the podcast. Where's our text thread? There it is. Someone shared this. This guy named, well, I won't say his name, but a pastor tweeted, "The God that you serve is too wise to make a mistake and too loving to be unkind." And some dude just responded, "Our source of light gives us cancer, dude." I just thought that was funny, but also like if your weird theological statements can be disproved or at least unwound with something as simple as like the sun gives us cancer, dude. Mm-hmm. It just makes for an interesting conversation. Just with platitudes, like just how we just toss platitudes out into the world.
Totally.
But I have a new segment for us, and it's a short one, but I think
I love this. I don't even know what this is, but Tim, bring in the segments.
Well, I like this kind of stuff a lot. And my favorite musician in the whole world is Tom Waits, who probably most people haven't listened to, but he collects weird and unusual facts. And
Really?
So when he's on a talk show, he always shows up with a new, strange fact. And I'll use them in the classroom all the time because they're just weird, interesting things. So this segment will be called Strange Stuff. This morning on the radio, I heard, I'm going to ask you a question, but this isn't the fact yet. This is just a precursor.
Okay.
This is this is a primer.
All right.
A gold nugget, a pure gold nugget, the size of a matchbox. If you flatten it, how big does it get if you flatten it all the way out? So a gold nugget, pure gold, the size of a matchbox.
And flattened it paper thin.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with half of a football field.
That is exactly what the person guessed on the radio this morning.
Really?
Yeah,
oh, that's funny.
That's the exact guess. It's the size of a tennis court.
Ooh.
So it's pretty much about that size. But I thought that was interesting. But this is the weird fact.
Oh, hold on.
What?
Why isn't that a weird fact too?
It is a weird fact, but that was just kind of like that's just a bonus. This one has a biblical tie-in.
Oh, nice. Okay, let's hear it.
All right. So there is a psychological disorder called bonethropy, in which a human believes themselves to be a bovine. so a cow or some kind of a cow. And it is believed that King Nebuchadnezzar is sometimes attributed with bone therapy because of the description in the book of Daniel, which said he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen. So I'd never heard of bone therapy before, but I thought it was interesting. It's a true thing that there are people who believe themselves to be cows, and that King Nebuchadnezzar was believed to be one of the first documented boanthropic individuals.
And that's from Tom Waite?
No, that's just from me. I'll share it. You want to hear a Tom Waits one?
Sure. I mean, you're on fire.
I use this in my class. Maybe I've said this in the podcast before, but I thought this was fascinating. So I tell kids, like, we can do strange and unusual facts as they can do it in an informative essay and research the history of it, because like something like blood is thicker than water, what that phrase meant when it was first developed to what it means now, it changes, like a game of telephone through history. Yeah. So saying something's like a spitting image of somebody or whatever. So there's a phrase called a dead ringer, right? And what does a dead ringer mean to you?
That someone's an exact copy of somebody.
Like you look at, you're a dead ringer for so-and-so.
Yeah.
But the origin of that phrase...
I get that. I get that about Harry Styles.
All the time. I see it.
A dead ringer.
We were playing Harry Styles last night in the house.
Well, all I'm saying is that's relevant to Generation Z.
Dude. Or maybe Generation A.
Yeah.
So a dead ringer originally was... people were eating food off of lead plates, and it would cause them to go unconscious and seem dead, and so their families would bury them, and often people would wake up in a coffin, and they would start scratching, trying to get out. They were buried alive, and so people would dig them up and find them now dead for real because they were buried alive with scratch marks inside the coffin, so they're like, this isn't good. So they started tying strings around their fingers that go up over a tree with a little bell on it. And so if you were in there and you woke up, you could ring it, and that was a dead ringer.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
You're making this up.
No, isn't that great, though? And then somehow between that period of time, whenever that was, to now, it has changed from that to saying you're a dead ringer for somebody.
So this is a new segment of just weird facts.
Yeah.
All right, and you gave us 3.
I know. I won't give you that many every time.
No, I mean, I'm smarter than I was 5 minutes ago.
I love weird stuff about humanity. There's just these odd things that kind of give us the flavor that we need.
Oh, totally. And speaking of flavor, bacon flavors everything.
It's true.
You know, it's part of the joy of being bovine. Or is that pig?
That's pig. Maybe the bovine enjoy the pig. I don't know.
I'm an idiot. All right. Well, Timothy, I have to say that was a rousing success.
Was it? We'll see.
And
email
are you going to give
people
it?
Are like, I fast forwarded the last 5 minutes of the
podcast. Hey, we got a couple things before we dive in. All right, so we got a couple of things this week that we need to mention here on the show. It was Ladies' Week over at Patreon.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, and I frankly, I just want to shout out the ladies, particularly Heather, Serena, Rebecca, Jennifer, and Karen. I want to say thank you so much for coming on the Patreon team. As we always mention, we are a crowdfunded 501c3, which means everything that is given is tax deductible. But it also means we are listener supported and not ad supported. And so thank you for your
if you join Patreon, there is a Facebook group, a closed Facebook community. And a couple of those ladies immediately were on there, like sharing and asking questions and provoking conversation and stuff. So it was pretty cool.
Good job, ladies. Way to represent, ladies. So thank you for that. And then we've got a couple of, I just beg you for grace on getting back to emails because there are just hundreds of them. And so we get through maybe one or two an episode, and they're just so, to respond to some of these, via email, I don't even know where to start, but there are such good questions or issues that are always coming in. This one, As we're recording this, we're, I think, in almost a month into the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And we're all, well, I don't know all, but most of us seem unbelievably surprised at the Ukrainian leadership and the spirit of the people and the, defiance against kind of a more technological enemy. And this, Ukrainian president has just provided symbolic leadership that is, beautiful in contrast to the grilling of our latest Supreme Court nominee.
Good Lord.
That's just political theater, and obnoxious political theater at that. So, but we mentioned, I think last episode or the episode before, just about what do we do with Putin and imprecatory psalms, and then someone brought up the very obvious and real comparison to the questions that surrounded Hitler back in the day. I'm currently listening to your March 21 episode. In the first part of the episode, you were talking about the moral dilemma of desiring ill for Putin or to love one's enemies. Isn't that a dilemma that Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrestled with as a member of the plot to assassinate Hitler? Do those same ideas apply to the question of Putin? So, first of all, great stuff. And yes, I think there are obvious parallels to the set of questions that were surrounding. There were loads of German Christians that seemed to capitulate. And some even went so far as to provide sort of spiritual covering for Hitler's actions.
Right.
And there does seem to be a similar dynamic in play between one particular head of the Russian Orthodox Church. But there were other Christians who really wrestled with, well, if we can prevent greater evil, is our responsibility to do that. And so out of that, Bonhoeffer had this very, very famous, and it's reflected in some of his writings, this very, very famous dilemma. And he was part of an assassination plot, and so on and so on and so on. And so I think those ideas still apply, absolutely, particularly if you're in Putin's inner circle. But even for us, as we talked about, praying imprecatory psalms or wishing him evil, my posture is, when Jesus talks about, non-retaliation, when someone insults you, do not compete with them in evil doing. That's in the arena of personal insult. That's not in the arena of warfare or, geopolitics or even police or military, and so I don't have a great answer if I were in a situation like Bonhoeffer. I can't imagine Jesus of Nazareth ever commanding us to take another life. I just cannot envision a scenario where that is true. I can envision scenarios where it perhaps would be permitted. Whether it's in self-defense or in a situation where if America were being, invaded, let's say Red Dawn, and we don't have Patrick Swayze anymore. Yeah. That's the buzzer. We need a Gen Z buzzer right there. 84, 85, Red Dawn.
That's right. Nobody puts baby in a corner.
Well, that's a different movie, Tim, but that's a Patrick Swayze quote.
That's Swayze.
So that's doubly obscure. So
and they're both in both movies.
Yeah, indeed. But I'm just saying, there'd be a louder buzzer for you. Oh. If Red Dawn told the story of America being invaded by the Russians.
Yeah.
And I can envision if I were a Ukrainian Christian, actively resisting, to protect my family, my country, my neighbors. Because when Jesus is talking about non-retaliation, it's talking about when you're insulted, not your neighbor. And I think there are all sorts of strategies of creative goodness that we can invoke, whether it's praying in front of oncoming armies or the that individual in front of the tanks in Tiananmen Square, or the protests that brought down the Berlin Wall that started in Czechoslovakia, right? There are all sorts of strategies for creative goodness that don't have to involve violence. What I think Jesus would call into question is the fact that we don't think any of those other solutions are realistic or work, and we have all bought into the myth of redemptive violence, that the answer to bad people is by eliminating them through violent means.
Right.
And I don't see, obviously, a speck of that in Jesus of Nazareth. Now, I don't know how that informs government policy or whatever,
right.
But personally, I can only imagine in the most extreme cases of self-defense, ever using deadly force against another person, even in opportunities when I've had to use force to help break up, scenarios where people were being harmed. That force was very defensive sort of in nature, and not aggressive in nature. And so, I don't know. And I know, my goodness, I know this raises just cans of worms upon cans of worms, and I'm totally okay with us disagreeing about all the particulars. But I do think Jesus calls into question the automatic human response of harm for harm, pain for pain, eye for eye, and tooth for tooth. And so, like we said about the imprecatory Psalms, I just don't want to be the kind of person that their only recourse in seeing evil done is having evil done to that person.
Right.
I want to be more imaginative than that.
Yeah. Well, it kind of feeds into the roots, or the symptoms and symptoms and causes, or whatever.
Symptoms and roots, my friends.
Because you think when you talk about like the immediate retaliatory thing, at least with the personal, it makes me think of like the stand your ground laws, or the only thing that stops a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun, and that's a symptom thing where it's just back and forth until that's Gandhi, eye for an eye until nobody can see.
Yep.
And then you're like, well, how do you change the root cause of gun violence in America? It can't be just retaliating against it or escalating both sides so there has to be a root cause that it's, changes the course of that. When it comes to warfare, I don't know what it is. It was interesting though, I was thinking about with Zelensky, if he is in some ways modeling the turn your other cheek, the standing up and demanding respect kind of thing. Like, we're not going to let you.
Yep. And then shaming the Western countries into providing aid to protect innocent civilians.
He's provided a very interesting narrative to this whole thing.
One I'm sure that was based on my, extensive geopolitical knowledge. One that I'm sure was unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, he was like, one of the headlines the other day was like, Netflix is reinstating his comedic something or other movie, and it's like, oh yeah, he was a comedic actor.
Right. Yep. So great question. I'm sure many more to come the longer this goes on. This one, Tim, a comment you made raised this question.
I thought that I might get some of those.
So I love that. Mike and Tim, thanks so much for challenging podcasts. I've been listening for several weeks. I am a career missionary. I came to faith in college and have been discipled to think both apologetically and polemically in regards to my faith. Now, apologetic doesn't mean I'm sorry, but it means kind of the intellectual rationale behind the faith.
It does when I say it. I'm apologetic.
Yeah, well, yes. Yes, you are, buddy. And maybe that's the best way to be these days.
Maybe.
But I've learned early on to deconstruct others' worldview so that I could point them to Christ. Over the last few years, I've really been wrestling with some of the foundational teachings that I've never questioned about my faith, as I see incongruities between what I thought it meant for people to walk with Jesus and how I've seen it being lived out at both my church and in my mission organization. Boom. I've had a number of moments of deconstruction, reconstruction, panic attacks as I see the overwhelming number of topics that I see a need now to revisit. I think I'm coming to a more centered approach myself as I see lines that I previously would have eagerly drawn and got praise for. I was a good line drawer.
Yeah.
I see those lines gradually disappearing. A couple of questions pop in my mind as I think about the centered set perspective, though. One, when you are talking about playing soccer, who determines the rules of soccer? In other words, there have to be some lines, don't there? For example, there are things that are true about Christology, and therefore there are things that are false about it as well, right? Would you draw a line there regarding who teaches and what gets taught at your fellowship? Help me understand that one. And then secondly, Tim suggested that we should do away with mission trips. That's a hard one for me to swallow. Paul seemed convinced that faith comes by hearing and that this happens because people are sent. I'm wondering how you reconcile missions and evangelism. Can you expound on that? So, my goodness, dear questioner, what a wonderful, wonderful thought-provoking set of questions. Let's tackle number one first, which begins with who determines the rules of soccer? Now, in one sense, the group determines its own rules, right? So we could play a soccer game with people who are very new to soccer where we don't distinguish between indirect kicks and direct kicks, or we don't call offsides because it's a very confusing rule or whatever.
It's an important rule, though.
Huh?
Offsides, it's an important rule.
Well, it is.
No cherry picking.
Well, I'm just saying, have you watched much soccer, Timothy?
I played a lot.
Well, see, there you go. Offside's very important if you're a defender, not so much otherwise. But point being, in one sense, people are all going to have their own definitions of the center and can modify those definitions, as things go. And that's why we have so many denominations and so on. But in another sense, the center gets defined by the authoritative witnesses of the Christian tradition. That Christianity is an inherited faith. It's not just a faith we get to sort of riff on outside of any boundaries, as we encounter modern challenges. I mean, so I'm thinking of places like Philippians 2 or 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul in particular is quoting authoritative teaching that he's received and passed on, and he uses those very technical words surrounding the passing on and receiving of authoritative tradition in a technical rabbinical sense. Like received and passed on were official words that you would use upon taking something. And that's why those little bits in 1 Corinthians 15 or in 1 Corinthians 11 or in Philippians 2 are indented because we recognize there's something blocked off about that authoritative script that has been given. And so I do think that insofar as we can discern the teachings and voice of Jesus and the earliest definitions and affirmations of what Jesus is and what he did and who he is and what he was, I think those provide the bounds for which, the Christian faith resides within. Now, the big point we made with Mark is that you can use those lines in a bounded way or in a centered way. So the issue isn't in a centered approach whether or not you have lines, because we're always working to clarify the center. That's why we did a whole episode on who is the Jesus we're talking about, because every group's going to come up with their own. So we want to be, insofar as we are able, we've got we've got a stream of tradition that is sometimes helpful and sometimes needs to be deconstructed, as you yourself are doing. We have a stream of experience. We have a stream of creeds and doctrinal formulations that were, put together in some cases, in a very few cases, by the earliest followers of Jesus, and then hundreds of years later by creeds and councils and so on. And then we have the scriptures. And this whole sort of mix, and you can weight those in different ways, sort of forms for us the cultural milieu of what it is that we understand Jesus to be saying and how it is that we interpret his words. And so in that mix, there's an appropriate humility that says we could totally and absolutely be wrong. particularly when weighed
Yes.
against thousands and thousands of other takes and denominations.
That's a big thing too, especially with what a bounded approach looks like with excluding people.
Yes.
Holding a posture of humility within your understanding of things is
Yes, and that's one of the ways you discern a bounded approach versus a centered one.
totally.
So yes, I absolutely think there are lines, and there are agreed upon rules of soccer. Now, like I said in the beginning, I may lessen those rules or apply them more strictly depending on circumstance.
Yeah.
But to play soccer is to play soccer. To follow Christ is to follow Christ, and so we go to great lengths to talk about the Jesus that we're following, because there are instances where certain affirmations would not be true of him. Like if somebody just said, listen, I only see him as just a normal dude who got misinterpreted by his followers and they invented a whole religion.
Yeah.
No, I'd really disagree with that take. Now, but the point is, would that person be welcome in the community? Of course. But then you raise the question, would they be able to teach that in the community? And I would say no. No, we are a community that follows Jesus, and here's who we mean by Jesus. And there are all sorts of other communities out there. Hallelujah for them all. But this community, we're gonna follow Jesus, and this is how we understand him. That's absolutely a critical part.
Yeah.
Of the center
Jesus
set. defines
the
Jesus gets to define Jesus.
And
yes.
everything. Yeah. The Jesus, not the Jesus from Lebowski. The Jesus of Nazareth.
All right, there's another buzzer. I should have my dryer buzzer going off. I need some sort of dryer buzzer.
I'll put in a little ding.
So I think that is a super important question. We're not saying that stuff doesn't matter at all, but when it does, and I think it does more narrowly than most Christians apply it, I think the lines defining the reality of Jesus are much. I think that's a smaller list than I think most people want to say that it is. So you read doctrinal statements, and they have, well, we believe in the rapture of the church, and we believe in the literal 6-day creation or whatever. And you're just like, I just don't see that as the center of the faith at all.
Yeah.
I see 1 Corinthians 15, that first set of affirmations, is kind of the center of the faith. And so yes, there are lines, but how they're used is what's at issue.
Yeah.
Are they used to exclude, or they are used to provoke curiosity? Of course, I would guard who would have voice in a church fellowship as opposed to the podcast. We've brought people on the podcast that we don't agree with, for sure. Yeah. And certainly we'd bring people into our fellowship to have them teach that we don't agree with, but we would certainly agree with on this. We would be aligned in the center. We may not be aligned on all the particulars that flow from that.
Yeah.
So that was the first question. The second question, Timothy,
Uh-oh.
How dare you?
I know.
Okay, so give us some context for your missions trip. We shouldn't do missions trips anymore.
Hot takes. I was telling my students that I want to teach a class next semester called Hot Takes and Hot Cakes, where we just eat pancakes and talk about controversial topics.
I'm in. Hey, that's a good name for a church, by the way.
Hot Takes and Hot Cakes?
Yep.
We were talking about Christians who showed up at the border and were meeting Ukrainian refugees with kind of a gospel, like you just need Jesus message in the midst of their, entire world being upturned. And I find that repugnant. I'll use that word.
Whoa!
And so when I said we should do it with missions trips is in the context of saying, hey, look, spending all this money to send people over, especially because we were having a conversation about what it means to be saved. And
yes.
As we did the New Creation series and the Sermon on the Mount, it really made me question what evangelism really is, because our understanding or the way that we have been conducting ourselves for at least a couple hundred years is under this, like, we've got a secret, a code word that can get you into heaven. If you don't have the code word, you're going to go burn for eternity. And so we have this thing where we go share this code word, but there's a bait and switch to get the code word. So sending missions trips, let me just dig the hole deeper for myself. I was going to go in the other direction, but I'm just going to continue down the path I'm already on. Missions trips, my experience with missions trips is they're largely for the kids going on the trip. and rarely are they for the community in which they are visiting. That's been my experience. And I think there's other ways of doing discipleship that aren't at the disadvantage of other folks. Now, I don't know that I'm necessarily speaking to missionaries, but I think missions trips could be restructured in a service-oriented thing that is less about trying to save people and more about trying to help people. And that's why I referenced when I was hungry or when I was naked, did you feed me or clothe me? Not like when I was hungry, did you try to give me the secret code to get into heaven and then leave me there still hungry?
Right.
So I don't know, a missionary, I don't know what this individual that emailed in does for missions work. I would never try to offer judgment to that. But if you're out there and living amongst people and building community with them and helping them create a centered approach life and that kind of stuff, I think that's great. And you're digging in and spending all that time living with people, I think that's wonderful. And maybe mission trips could be kids going and serving the ministry that you have already set up. Maybe that's a different approach, different conversation, but just running out there and trying to have a savior complex. And this is coming from somebody who has a terrible Messiah complex myself.
Well, and if they see what you look like, they'd understand.
Yeah, there's a reason my hair is this long and I'm trying to look like Obi-Wan Kenobi. White Jesus coming through.
Oh, no, Tim, I think that's so good. And I'm so thankful for this question, particularly asked in the context of somebody who is doing this.
Yes.
So the issue, I don't think, is missions trips per se.
No.
But the issue is how they've been conceived of up until this point.
Yeah.
So here would be theological questions I would have.
And plus, real quick, I'm not trying to blanket statement all of it. I'm sure people are doing wonderful jobs. Let me push that through my experience and reacting to people at the border that were, not offering aid, but offering whatever you want to call that.
No, that totally makes sense. And Tim, I really agree with you. I mean, I went on spring break trips to share my faith. Like sharing your faith. I learned apologetics. I went to grad school in philosophy. I was going to teach in just an academic institution. I mean, I'm all in. But here are
here's my modern apologetics.
Here are the things. Yes, here are the things that I really would call into question on some understanding of missions. Not all, but some.
Yeah.
First of all, I think the overall posture of mission being something that we go do instead of mission being something that is part of our identity is really difficult. So to go do mission somewhere else with those poor people in non-reciprocal, non-mutual, non-learning environments, we're coming as the rich white people and we're coming to fix or to bless or to whatever. Man, I think that creates a hugely damaging dynamic that has been documented in a number of books that really call into question American understandings of charity and missions work. Number two, the message that we're sharing with people, I don't think accurately reflects the message of Jesus. That's part of what you were getting to.
Yeah.
Thirdly, I don't think Paul envisions individuals going to other parts of the country or the world as individuals just telling people and then leaving.
Right.
Now, Paul does that. And so the immediate pushback is, well, yeah, but that's what Paul did. Understood, but he was commissioned as an apostle. That was their job. But secondly, he was a church planter. And that's where this really I want to get very nuanced because I don't see, and if you go on to your questioner, Tim Gombas's podcast, he has a couple of interviews about the Great Commission that are super fascinating.
Really interesting.
We had him on here too. So if you look at our back catalog, we have one with Tim about the Great Commission that maybe could provide some other context. But the idea that we're coming and bringing with us a message about Jesus that doesn't intersect with the real aspects of human life. And again, this isn't everybody, but this is some people.
Right.
I just think does massive disservice to what it is that Jesus actually preached. And Paul's conception of that preaching was that it was done, that witnessing was done in community, and that the witness, the corporate witness, was the reality of the church. It wasn't people in the church going out and telling people about the faith. It was the example of the table fellowship that was countercultural, with people who had no reason to belong together, against the social order and hierarchy of the day. That was the proclamation. Remember, Paul only says that we proclaim the Lord's death. He only uses that phrase one time, and it's in reference to the Lord's table. That's where we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes, is in that sharing that common meal together. So issues I would have would go along the lines of the fact that mission, that we are witnesses to the resurrection rather than missionaries, I think is a really important distinction. When we're witnessing to something, we don't have to go anywhere else to do that.
Yeah.
Right? That's just it's kids who won't ever say anything in their school, but yeah, you put them around some poor people and sure, they'll be bold. But as you say, who's that really for? I mean, that's for the kids. And we have numerous examples of overseas organizations that have just come back and said, you've done much more harm than you've done good. Secondly, it puts us in a position of superiority that I think really erodes gospel dynamics. Paul, to the people he was reaching, always came assuming a socially inferior position. That's why he will call himself a slave or a servant. He'll refer to himself as the chief of sinners. He's always assuming the lowest position socially. Yeah. And very often what we do in mission trips is just the reverse.
Yep.
We assume the highest position, like they need us and what we're bringing, as opposed to we need them, right? But even the us and the we, right? And the them and the they, that already creates dynamics that just aren't gospel dynamics, right? The gospel levels the playing field. Now, again, I'm only describing some. I'm not describing all. So if you're somebody who's like, well, yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying, great. We're just pointing out that not everyone understands missions the way that we do. Yeah. And we think that's a problem. And we actually think the greatest place for missionary work in America is the American church.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think we have any moral authority to be sending anyone anywhere about how to do it.
Yeah. It pulls everything into context, because it's you have to, and this is what caused me to have this whole, ramble or whatever in the first place, was just that I don't know, as we come into question the heaven and earth and versus the heaven and hell, and what Jesus came to do and why Jesus had to die, right? We had that podcast episode that riled some folks up. And trying to understand all of that, because all of that is why you go on a missions trip. You're going to preach this good news and to get people to, convert to these ideas. But if I don't understand those ideas, or if they're much bigger or drastically different than what I thought, well, then that whole thing has to be reassessed. Like, what is it that Jesus is? And that's why I said that in the last podcast, was like, what does it actually mean to be an ambassador of Jesus on this planet? Who is Jesus? What is it that he's asking? What was it that he was demonstrating or modeling? And then what does it mean to be an ambassador of that? What does it mean to be an ambassador of the kingdom of heaven?
Yeah.
I don't think that's what it is.
Yeah.
So what does it mean? What does it mean to be the ambassador? And
here's, let's push that even further,
Timothy.
Let's do it. As Gambus has said, so say we all. No, but this is actually something that's been said for years, that all the imperatives in the New Testament are directed to the church, not the world. Now, the response that our questioner anticipates is, yeah, but how will people believe if they don't hear?
Yeah.
And so someone needs to tell them. And my response is, no one ever says the telling has to be some prepackaged announcement that's separate from the formation of a community that witnesses to the reality, of the risen Jesus. No question about that. And I do think it involves certainly teaching and ideas, and you see that with Paul in Acts 17, right? He's got a polemic to him where he's talking about, hey, you guys have all sorts of altars, but here's an altar to an unknown God. Let me reveal him to you.
Yeah.
Right? But there is, I trust Paul with that more than I trust me with that. Because there seems to be the idea that I'm to take the good news and I end up Americanizing the good news.
Yeah.
And I end up Americanizing what church looks like. And so if you're not careful, this can be very much the creation of something that will itself have to be destructed or deconstructed, down the road.
That's why I said it was like, I think I said something to the effect of like, this is idolatry, but in this case, we're the idols.
Right. Yep. So I just think, man, I think the focus of the church needs to be on getting its own house clean, and that is mission work.
Yeah.
Now, dear questioner, pushback galore. So we will be looking for your email in the mountain of emails. And we want pushback because we're just kind of riffing off of things that we've experienced or understandings that we have. Would love to hear your thoughts. So thank you for trusting us with this question. We absolutely love when people are like, I'm not sure I buy it. Because the goal isn't that you agree. The goal is not at all that you agree with us. The goal is to provoke curiosity and to simply say, hey, maybe this thing's bigger than what we heard. That's all. That's all it is. Yeah. Whether you agree or not, great. We had a guy, this is the best. This is a guy he's a pastor. And Tim saw his email this morning, and it said, while I've often wanted to yell and argue with you because you tend to paint certain people groups and theologies with too broad a brush, on the other hand, I've learned so much from listening to you two and the people you've interviewed that I can't not continue to listen.
Yeah.
So, man, what a great thing. Yeah, of course we're screw ups, and of course we don't always appreciate nuance, and we're learning.
I will continue to remind people that I am only trying to be a disciple, and I am fumbling forward in the dark, trying to learn and grow as much as possible. So most people are listening to me wrestling in real time with stuff, which just happens to be not just between two people, but happens to be between a few thousand more. Right.
And it's so fun to do this with you all. Now, back to image. Yes. We are telling the salvation story of the kingdom. And so when Jesus comes announcing the kingdom of heaven is at hand, the kingdom of God is near, that brings to mind an Old Testament story that isn't readily apparent to a lot of us Americans, or Westerners anyway. And upon the telling of the kingdom story, words like saved, grace, faith, and works take on different flavor than they do in the you're a sinner, Jesus is perfect, God demands perfection, Jesus substitutes for you in your place, and you get to go to heaven. When you die, elements of that story, I do think Jesus in some way was a substitute. That language is all over. I don't get it, and I don't think it was the angry father lashing out at the first person he could get a hold of. Yeah. And the son saying, well, hit me, Father, don't hit them. I don't think that's at all the story the Bible tells.
The Garden of Gethsemane seems to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
That's part of the flesh and blood of Jesus that I'd love to,
indeed,
explore.
Yes. So there are parts of that traditional story that we can attach Bible verses to, but I don't think it captures the huge narrative epic flow of the story. And so we started in the book of Genesis looking at the word saved, right? It is by grace you have been saved. And so, okay, what does it mean to be saved? Well, for me, that always meant being saved means go to heaven and avoiding hell. And that has to do with my soul. That's a story about what happens to my soul when I die. as opposed to the story I think the Bible is telling, which is about what happens to me as an embodied soul, even if that is the right term, as an embodied human, or just to be human is to be embodied. And what does salvation mean in my embodied state? Is my salvation separate from what happens to my body, or is it included? And as embodied creatures, and as we looked at in Genesis, we are the image and likeness of the invisible God. And so we are to image him, and that the whole way of life is conceived of as a mode of life called worship. That the human was to take care of the garden, to work it, that those are worship words. That the psalmist in Psalm 8 talks about that vocation as being crowned with glory and honor. That we are the honor of God and the glory of God, and our vocation is image bearers. And that the Old Testament ends not with the question of how are we going to get these sinners saved, but the fact that the humans don't image the one true God. Adam and Eve did not image God. Israel did not image God. And so God now sends the one true image, his son, Jesus, to image God, and the only one to do so perfectly. So Jesus, in his salvation, of course, there is forgiveness. No question about it. No question. As part of our swapping out of our vocation, we have sinned. But the sin isn't the root issue. The sin is the symptom of the root issue, that we've become idolaters, that we no longer image the one true God. We image things within creation and find our identities in those things. So it's not just enough to say that human beings are sinners. It's that human beings have lost the vocation they were entrusted with, and as a result, sin. Now, Paul affirms this understanding when we get to Romans. And the reason I'm using Romans, A, Gombis just did a whole series on it that was mind-blowing and wonderful. B, it's always been the book that's been used to describe salvation in the traditional way. In the, Jesus, the Romans road is the, hey, you've fallen short of the glory of God. Yeah. And the Romans road goes on from there. And so it's fascinating to me that there are these parts in Romans that pick up the image story that we kind of miss. And so between Beverly Gaventa, Timothy Gombis, Scott McKnight, N.T. Wright, among others, there are just some things that have been totally eye-opening for me. And the wonderful gift is I get to share them with incredibly curious Timothy, with a bunch of us participating and overhearing the conversation. So, when we get to Romans, and Gombis, man, if you're up for it, it's masterful. It's a masterclass, but it's seminary level, and it is thick, baby. You got to sit there with Romans open and chewing on it.
He made his own, like a Word doc.
Yeah.
Translate. I just reprinted it. I haven't listened to the series yet because I've been waiting to be able to sit down with the text that he has, so that I can be really intentional with it. But he made that available to people too if they wanted the his kind of
his translate. He's writing a commentary, so he translates some words differently, and but he does it without the chapter numbers and verse numbers, and so it's anyway, he's just doing great work. But as we all do, he channels others. And so what I do when I hear something from him is I text him and ask him who he's channeling, and then I go kind of read those sorts of things. So all that is to say, this is not thinking original to me. I think everyone knows that by now. I'm just like the English Channel, a very large body of water.
So that's who you are, the Wonder Twins?
Form of
You're the
a large body of water. All right, so let's get to Romans. Now, when we get to Romans, the first thing that Paul does, and man, Gombis, he's so great at this. McKnight also wrote a book called Reading Romans Backwards. And Walsh and...
Keysmat? Or
Keysmat. wrote a book on Romans, and we had them on, like
great.
Romans Remixed. I think it was something like that. Amazing. And then there's Reading Romans with Eastern Eyes, another book that I would recommend. And so there's all this great work being done in Romans. And one of the things that all this great work points out is that the issue in Romans isn't, hey, these people need a systematic theology. The issue is we have two groups of Christians who are despising and judging each other. And that Paul is creating unity. So in reading Romans backward, McKnight says, you start with the application, and the application helps you understand the argument that gets there. So the problem that's being addressed is you have Roman house churches that are at odds with each other. Yeah. And so Paul lays this massive theological foundation showing that these groups, neither of which are superior to the other, both in their fallenness and in their justification.
Yeah.
All right, but so I'm not going to track that big argument, right? Gombis and McKnight and Wright and others do that. But as they're making and showing Paul's argument, they observe things about the text that have to do with this glory image story that the Bible is telling about what it is that is to be saved. And so in Romans, there are callbacks to the Genesis 3 narrative. Now remember, the humans were made in the image and likeness of God in Genesis 1, and they were invited to rule. That's what it means to be an image and likeness, is they're royal participants in the reign of God.
Yeah.
And their job is to image God to creation and to image creation back to God. That's from N.T. Wright. Now, this works well for one chapter, but then in chapter 2, we get another understanding of what image means, because instead of royal language, now we get priestly language, that the human was to work the garden and take care of it. But there are scholars that point out that worship and obey are actually better translations of the Hebrew there, because they're used in the book of Numbers as to describe the work of the priests in the tabernacle and temple. And so there is this royal aspect and this priestly aspect to the human vocation. Instead of guarding the garden and taking care of it, we have a talking snake that arrives. And instead of imaging Yahweh to the talking snake, the humans take on the image of the talking snake when they choose to obey the snake's wisdom rather than Yahweh's command. Right? So all of a sudden there's an exchange. The humans were to rule over the fish and the birds and the animals, and then it very specifically says, and all the things that move along the ground. Yeah. And then something that moves, I guess maybe not even had been moving along the ground, because that was one of the curses that come later. But some sort of talking thing, some agent of disorder and chaos comes into the garden, and instead of imaging Yahweh back to that piece of creation, they submit to its wisdom and thereby image it by taking the fruit.
Is that what N.T. Wright's saying by imaging creation back to God?
Yes. So the idea is, I mean, take the word image. So we are made in the image of God. We're to be living, breathing, embodied specks of the character and nature and mission of Yahweh in the world. And we're to do that with creation in view. This isn't about our individual souls. This is about the flourishing of creation and bringing forth its potential, and the human community growing and expanding to cover the whole earth, right? This was the expansion of the Garden of Eden to cover all of human civilization that had been around at that time, but with a different emphasis and a different focus. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. So when we get to Romans, there are a couple of exchanges that Paul references with Genesis 3 in view. And so he says in chapter 1, verse 21, "For although they knew God." Now, Gombis thinks Paul is using a formula that was common called almost an indictment formula, a list of complaints against the Gentile nations. He's using this with a very polemic purpose in mind that serves Paul's greater, rhetorical purpose for the book. So we're not going to get into all the deets here, but the they is, in this sense, is to be understood as Gentile Christians. Okay. Or Gentiles. I shouldn't say Gentile Christians, but just Gentiles, the descent of humanity into idolatry. So Paul says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like immortal human beings and birds and animals and reptiles. In other words, they've exchanged the glory that was theirs, that Psalm 8 references, of their image bearing to now image things within creation, whether it's imaging them and their agenda, whether it's imaging, in those days, there were statues that were just carved of animals, like the golden calf, right, in the Old Testament.
Bone therapy.
So you have people who are always uncomfortable with an invisible God, right? Even when the Romans sack Jerusalem, they mock the Jews because they open up their temple and there's no God there.
Right.
So we've always wanted images of the invisible God. And the only image ever given was human persons, and then because they became corrupted, the perfect image of the unseen God, namely Jesus. So notice Paul speaks of an exchange where we exchanged the glory of the God, which we participated and shared in, for images made to look like created things. So we're now, do you see what he's using, that whole strain of thought to talk about how we don't have a sin problem. We're now imaging, we have an idolatry problem. We're no longer living according to the mode of life that is called worship. We're now living in the mode of life called idolatry, which is destructive to human bodies, and it devours ultimately itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is a massive point. And then he says a similar thing in verse 25. He says, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the creator. Now, the worshiped and served language, where did we just encounter that?
Back in the beginning.
That's in Genesis 2, my friend.
Yeah.
Right? So Genesis 2, we were to worship and obey. We were to take care of it and serve the garden. Now we're worshiping and serving something that is a part of creation rather than the invisible creator who is to be forever praised. Amen.
Yeah.
So do you see how Paul diagnoses the problem?
Yeah.
The problem isn't that we're sinners. The problem is that we failed at our vocation.
Then I would imagine our understanding of sin is a repercussion or like a byproduct or that comes from that, right?
Yes. Now, let me go on. That's a great point, Timothy.
Right.
Shut your face.
Sorry.
That's a great point, Timothy. You're anticipating.
I'm anticipating.
Inerrantly where this sucker's headed. So when Paul gets to Romans 3 and this very famous statement, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All right? Now, it sounds like the glory of God is like 1,000 righteousness points.
Yep.
And Mike Erie is at about 8 righteousness points. So I have fallen short.
Very short.
Very short of the righteousness points. Some would even question the 8. I'm just going to namely my family. But so this whole strand of scholarship, he says fall short isn't the best verb or way to translate the verb there. It's humans have sinned and lack the glory of God. So not fall short of, although fall short, if you read it in terms of lack, it makes sense.
Sure.
But if you read it in terms of, oh, well, God's got this thing and we all miss it. It's like, so I remember someone describing sin like a Grand Canyon, and a long jumper may be able to jump longer into the Grand Canyon, but they still fall short. I may just, plop over the edge without even jumping, right? And so
that cross-shaped bridge falls down.
A cross-shaped bridge, yes. I've used that. Yes. And so instead, what Paul's talking about is all of sin and lack the glory of God. That is, and what's that mean? We're not image-bearing. We failed at our vocation. And to fail at the vocation in the Bible is called sin. Sin is failure. Sin is missing. Sin is coming up short, right? So the sin isn't the individual moral trespass. The sin is the failure to live out the identity and all of the destruction that comes when we image created things rather than the creator. And we see this, right? With sexuality, we see it with money, we see it with violence, we see it writ large all over our world. And if we're really honest about the human heart, my heart, not just anyone's heart, my human heart, it's writ large there too.
Yeah.
And so the transformation isn't from sinner to non-sinner. And we make it seem that way, that the goal of following Jesus is not to sin.
Yeah, to be converted.
Yes. Instead, Paul is going to argue, the goal of salvation is the restoration of the human vocation. And that vocation is worship.
Yeah.
That vocation is image bearing. What did you say? I'm sorry?
It's being center focused.
I was yelling. Well, that's an aspect of it, no question.
But I mean, when you look at that posture of what it means to image, because when I think about if you're focused on those bounded, whatever, I don't want to detract, but keep going.
Well, and one of the things we image are the human attempts to control the unseen God through religious activity.
And then we become the arbiters of like what is right, what is wrong, what is everything, and then the destruction that reaps from us playing God or trying to eat whatever. You can see how those different postures or different focuses. Yes.
People always image in real life. Remember, imaging isn't like my personality. Image is human, the whole of human life. Sex, work, play, sweat, blood, tears, relationships. The whole sphere of human life is the arena for image bearing, not just religious stuff. All right? And because of that, the disaster of idolatry and wrong image bearing is manifested in all spheres.
Yeah.
That's why Paul has this very interesting quote, and Gambas makes hay with this thing. And I found it absolutely fascinating. That idolatry always plays itself out in the human body. Always. And Paul has this very famous list of that we take to mean, hey, look, everyone's fallen into the Grand Canyon because we've all fallen short of the glory of God. But Gambas is asking us to notice the body parts that are mentioned in this list of Psalms that Paul strings together, right? They've all turned away. They've together become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their way of life, and the way of life of peace they do not know. Now, that's what happens when you exchange the glory of the invisible God, the vocation given to us as full humans, for a lesser vocation to image something in creation itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So go ahead, buddy.
Well, I was going to say, how did you phrase that before you read the scripture?
I don't know.
About it manifesting or within the body?
Yeah. This is always embodied action. So image bearing is embodied. It's not just what you think or believe or sing. And so is idolatry. Mm-hmm. So you see the corruption of the human body And that's why Paul gets into degrading human bodies with each other and talks about sexual sin. And there's this famous illustration of same-sex gendered erotic behavior as an illustration of the degradation of human relationships. And we can get into all of that stuff down the road. We always make that stuff the focus, the vice list that comes in the midst of all of this. But I just find it fascinating that that really isn't the focus of the text. The focus is on the exchange, and then downstream of that exchange of identity and conception of our vocation, you have the mess of the human body.
Yeah, it's the symptoms and roots again, but just
always. So what is the consequence of being of imaging mammon, right? Money. Well, let's say that you neglect family relationships and you're estranged from your family for the sake of work. All right. So part of your image bearing to the god Mammon is now resulting in embodied relationships that are dysfunctional and unhealthy.
Right. Yep. Totally.
Or I image a certain view of sexuality that just sees pleasure as the highest good and using people for that. Right. That can't help but play itself out bodily and in social dynamics.
Yep.
Totally.
All of those. Yeah. You can just for fun, play those 7 deadly sins out and just as a model of an exercise, and you can see how those things play that. Yep,
absolutely. Which, now this whole thing sets up Paul's huge exhortation that I've always and perpetually misunderstood until recently. In Romans 12, when Paul sorts of shifts from the building blocks of his argument to sort of exhortations. Now, let's read this now with all of that context in mind. So notice, what is salvation for Paul here? Therefore, I urge you, in view of God's mercy, brothers and sisters, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Never understood what he's talking about there, but notice the combination of things, right? Offer your bodies,
right,
plural, as a singular sacrifice. So you're doing this as a community.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. And the sacrificial language harkens back to Genesis 2, garden language, and to the worship and serve language Paul just used in Romans 1.
Yeah.
And then notice that is holy and pleasing to God. This offering of our bodies. Now, offering of our bodies has nothing to do here about my soul trusting Jesus for my eternal destination or accepting King Jesus in my heart.
Right.
Worship here is an entire mode of human existence that includes and is focused upon my body. Right? And this is your true and proper worship. And then he talks about the mind. Do not conform to the patterns of life in this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, for mind here doesn't just mean brain, like learn new information. Right? Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. So we read this as, oh yes, go to church and sing some songs.
Right. Got to get back to church.
Oh, but do you see how big that is? And then you get to 1 Corinthians where Paul has an entire freaking chapter on the fact that resurrection is resurrection of human bodies.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just the soul going somewhere. Right? But if Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. In other words, what God did for Jesus, God's going to do for everybody. The whole universe.
This stuff's all weird.
Will be resurrected. Yes. Yes.
Why did Jesus' resurrected body still have the wounds?
Because, as Paul says, it is contiguous and non-contiguous with the former body. It's animated now by the Spirit. So he'll use the word spiritual, which we think means internal regarding religious things. Spiritual versus fleshly for Paul in this chapter, I think, references two animating features. The flesh, the animation of this age, this present age, versus the spirit, which is the animating spirit of the human body in the age to come. So for Jesus, you could recognize him and not recognize him. He could show up in locked rooms and yet still had same scars. I have no idea, and it's all guessing.
But that's really interesting though.
But Paul conceives of salvation as embodied salvation.
Yeah.
Right? And this is totally consistent with how the whole Bible ends. Right? When my favorite chapter in the history of any book of any author anywhere in the world is, then I saw a new heaven and new earth. And new heaven and new earth here, the word new doesn't mean brand new, it means renewed.
Made new.
Yes, it made new. Then I saw a new heaven and new earth, for the first heaven and first earth had passed away. There was no longer any sea. That's a callback to Genesis 1, where the Spirit of God was hovering over the chaotic waters. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven, out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice saying, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, he will dwell with them, and he will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more crying or death or pain, for the old order of things, even the old order of humanity, has passed away. Now it's a new order of humanity. He was seated on the throne, said, I am making everything new, which is the greatest cry in the history of the world. And then in chapter 22, as the author describes a renewed Eden, it says, and they will reign with God forever, which is exactly the Genesis 1 vocation.
Yeah.
So what is saved, Timothy? Well, it's a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
It is the renewal of the human vocation, which includes forgiveness. It includes deliverance, because one of the things we didn't get into in Romans is that Paul conceives of sin and death as powers that we have unleashed.
Oh, yeah.
And those powers enslave us. And so whatever salvation means has to include forgiveness. It also includes deliverance from the powers and the principalities. It includes transformation into the image, right? Notice Paul in 1st and 2nd Corinthians is always talking about being renewed into the image of God. What's that mean? Yeah. It doesn't mean like we're like God in his personality, although it includes that. It means we're restored to the image bearing, which includes... Now we
all look like Ewan McGregor?
Yes! Is it coincidence that Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jesus were played by the same person? No. So that's how big and wide. So it's transformation, it's deliverance, it's forgiveness, but it wraps the entire sphere of human life back into right relationship with creator, creation, and other image bearers.
It's a lot.
So that's why Paul will say, you have been saved, you are being saved, and you will be saved. Because it's all of that happening always. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting, that section of scripture is a very interesting, to be used as a gospel text. Like if that was the good news, the way that you presented to people, rather than a perverted version of a certain verse earlier, it's an interesting picture. Like this is what we're all moving towards. This is what we're talking about. This is our understanding of what God intends and wants to do, is this reunification.
That's right. That's right.
Being made new. And I mean,
totally.
it's a really interesting, I listen back to this when I'm editing and I say interesting like 50 times a podcast episode. And I'm not just bugging somebody, but it's driving me nuts. I need to.
Well, then let's stop. Let's use fascinating.
Intriguing. I think I say that a lot too. But
intriguing.
It's a beautiful, full-bodied proclamation of what it is that God's trying to do, rather than a guilt and shame bait and switch thing that we have been our mode of transport for so long.
Well, here's what it does for me, just personally. And this is obviously stuff that's been, working its way into my brain, heart, soul, whatever, for years. But it's given me a conception of human life that is so different from the go to heaven and avoid hell story.
Yes.
So that now, like, creation does matter. All of my parenting matters. The way I treat other image bearers matters. And not... and even how I understand missionary work or evangelism or Bible or church, I mean, it reconfigures the entire operation so that now the goal is to live into the new vocation rather than try to work my way to it or just stop sinning. I found that when my image bearing is progressing in my real human life in all of its facets, I don't sin as much.
Yeah. Totally, absolutely.
But that is never
this
the
morning
point.
Before you did this, and now I feel like it's like a weird. I was like praying this morning. I was just like, I get it. I get these. I understand how this missing the mark, getting caught up, the repercussions, all that kind of stuff of sin. I see it in my life. I understand it. It makes perfect sense to me. But I was just like, but to what end? Like.
Right.
And so it's
if we're already forgiven, then why not?
Well, so that brings up other pieces of scripture that are interesting, but it's like just what you're saying. It's more compelling because I can see the full embodiment of all of this. I'm not doing it, but like you said, when I am, and all it's like a clock, right? All those gears start to move together and the clock starts to operate the way it's supposed to operate. And when it's not, those gears are grinding against each other and the clock is malfunctioning. But when I really see all those different embodiment things you just listed, when I see that in my physical life, my day-to-day, I do see a posture that is, I don't want to say it's rewarding because I think that's the wrong terminology. I feel... a more full-bodied healthiness.
Yeah.
Is that a way to say that?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So anyway, that if you tell that story, do you see how that fits in the kingdom story?
Yes.
The kingdom story, right, is that we were made to live as ambassadors and representatives and co-rulers of the king.
Yes.
And that specific vocation manifested itself in certain ways. That's since been corrupted, and now in Jesus, as the true human who images God, we're being renewed in the image of God.
And you can see how this can only be done in community because I am incapable of it.
Correct.
On my own.
Only done in community. Why? Because we're imaging a God of community. A communal God, yes.
Yeah, I think you said that last episode, and I think I put that as the Instagram soundbite.
Nice.
But it's such a good, that's a simplified way of really communicating this whole idea.
Right. So here's what we're going to do, Timothy.
But you know what? You can't do that on a missions trip when you leave after 3 days or a week.
Well, we have, as part of our church, we have a young lady that lives in Kenya. And now I'm going to get this wrong, but what I want to say she does is she does legal work, but I think it's actually medical work.
When you say she's part of your church in Tennessee, she's not there physically. She
was Jewish. She, because of the witness of our church community, she accepted this Jesus without pressure, coercion, or manipulation.
In Kenya, like watching it online, or
no, physically, and then moved to Kenya.
Gotcha.
To provide either legal or medical resources. And I'm an idiot because I should know, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But is committed to living there and for the good and flourishing of the people, regardless of whether or not they accept Jesus, quote unquote, or not. Now, if that's what we're talking about,
I think so.
I'm all in because I want to do that in my neighborhood.
Yes.
So the fact that there's some people want to do it in Japanese neighborhoods or in Kenyan neighborhoods. Perfect.
Yes.
Great. But it's all the same vocation. No one's
Yes.
going on trips to do something different than what we always do.
Right. We had Sky on, Jitani, I don't know, a year or two ago, and he came on to talk about the theology of vocation.
Yes.
And it was a lot of that, like all this rhetoric about vocation and calling, and that we use, God, I've been called to this, God called me to this. But there are certain things that God has called all of us to. And in the way that kind of stuff is manifested, yeah, sure. Maybe that is going to another country and living there and embodying
Absolutely.
this in a group of people. That's amazing.
Yep.
I don't want to, none of my missions trip rant was in any way directed towards that.
Yeah. I was just thinking of her because she was such a compelling example
No, I think that's a great example.
to kind of the, and there's a story about why and she's a remarkable young woman. I mean, unbelievable. Or we had Katie Davis Majors on years ago. She was somebody in Uganda who had adopted, I don't know,
It was a
17 kids or something. And so that sort of embodied and enacted loyalty to Jesus in local contexts that aren't American.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I can speak and rant about it all day. Those are folks that are doing it.
Yeah. Yep. I just want to say we don't have to go anywhere to do that.
I totally agree.
Anyway, all right, friends, what we're going to do next episode, unless something, crazy happens, we're going to talk about the negative side of saved. What are we saved from? If it's not specifically a heaven story and hell story, then that raises the natural question. What do we do with all that judgment language, all that hell language? And we've talked about hell before, so it'll be bigger than hell. But it's how do we conceive of wrath in this story, and what does being saved from that mean?
Yeah.
So nothing controversial there. It'll be great. And again, the goal, as always, dear friends, is to not agree, but to provoke your curiosity to study it yourselves. We know there are loads of people who disagree with this nonsense. And often, one of my great weaknesses, and I have many, I'm only an 8 on the righteousness scale.
That's right.
Is that I use hyperbolic language when I get fired up about something. And so that pastors, hey, sometimes you paint in broad brushes. Absolutely. Absolutely. No question about it. So we receive all of that as people who are, as Tim said, stumbling along. But we're just, the goal is never to just impose new sets of dogma on people.
Yeah.
But it's to explore and wrestle and question and pursue curiosity together. So towards that end, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance to you. And in these days, may he give us peace. Amen and amen. Till next time, friends.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. Voxology is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is supported by listeners just like yourself. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology. You can also join the community and hang out and chat with us on the socials. Facebook.com/Voxology Podcast and on Instagram @Voxology. Thank you for walking the long road with us.